The final CCTV footage before she disappeared. Hey everyone, before we dive into today's story, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on your notification bell so you never miss these deep dive investigations. And if you think you can solve this mystery before the end, share this video with someone who loves a good puzzle. Now, let's get into it. The timestamp reads 11:47 p.m. March 15th, 2019. The grainy black and white footage shows a woman in her early 30s walking through the parking garage of the Riverside Apartments in Portland, Oregon. Her name is Rebecca Hartwell, and in exactly 13 minutes, she will vanish from the face of the earth. But what the cameras captured in those final moments would haunt investigators for years, because Rebecca wasn't alone that night, and what happened in that parking garage wasn't what anyone expected. Rebecca Hartwell was the kind of person who lit up every room she entered. Ask anyone who knew her, and they'd tell you the same thing. She had this infectious laugh that started as a giggle and built into something that made everyone around her smile. She worked as a pediatric nurse at a manual hospital, the kind of nurse who remembered every kid's name, who drew smiley faces on band-aids, who stayed late to read bedtime stories to the children who were too sick to go home. She lived in apartment 4C of the Riverside complex, a modest one-bedroom she'd decorated with plants and second-hand furniture she'd restored herself. Her Instagram was full of before and after shots of chairs she'd reupholstered, tables she'd refinished. She had 847 followers. People who knew her. People who cared. On March 15th, every single one of them would be desperately searching for answers. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning of that day, because to understand what happened that night, you need to understand who Rebecca was, and more importantly, who was watching her. Rebecca's best friend, Maya Chen, spoke to her 3 times that day. The first call came at 7 in the morning, right as Rebecca was getting ready for her shift. Maya worked in tech, and she was dealing with a crisis at work, some server issue that had everyone panicking. Rebecca talked her down, the way she always did. Maya would later tell police that Rebecca had this gift for making you feel like everything would be okay, even when the world was falling apart. The second call came during Rebecca's lunch break. They talked about normal things. Maya's terrible date from the night before. The new Thai restaurant that opened downtown. Whether they should take that pottery class they'd been talking about for months. Just normal, everyday conversation between 2 friends who'd known each other since college. Nothing that would suggest that in less than 12 hours, one of them would be gone. The third call came at 9:30 p.m. Rebecca had just gotten home from her shift. She sounded tired, Maya said. Exhausted, actually. It had been a long day. There was a 5-year-old patient, a little girl named Emma, who'd been admitted with pneumonia. Rebecca had stayed with her family for an extra 2 hours after her shift ended, just to make sure Emma was comfortable, that the parents understood the treatment plan, that they had everything they needed. That was Rebecca. She couldn't just leave. She had to make sure everyone was okay first. During that final call, Rebecca mentioned something that wouldn't seem important until later. She said she'd noticed someone in the parking garage the night before. A man sitting in a dark sedan, just sitting there with the engine off. She'd walked past him on her way to her car, and he'd been staring straight ahead, not looking at his phone, not doing anything. Just sitting. It creeped her out a little, she told Maya, but then she laughed it off. Portland was weird, she said. Probably just someone waiting to pick up their girlfriend or hiding from their wife to eat fast food in peace. They both laughed. Maya didn't think anything of it. Why would she? The call ended at 9:52 p.m. Rebecca said she was going to take a bath and go to bed early. She had another long shift the next day. Maya said, "Okay, love you, talk tomorrow." Rebecca said, "Love you too." And that was it. The last conversation Rebecca Hartwell would ever have. But Rebecca didn't go straight to bed that night. At 10:15 p.m., she posted on Instagram a photo of her bathroom, candles lit around the tub, a book resting on the edge. The caption read, "Self-care Saturday even though it's Friday because who makes the rules anyway?" 17 people liked it within the first 10 minutes. 3 people commented. Her co-worker Jessica wrote, "You deserve it, Queen," with 3 heart emojis. Her mother commented, "Beautiful sweetie, sleep well." A guy named Marcus, who'd gone to her high school, wrote, "Looking cozy." At 11:23 p.m., Rebecca's phone pinged with a text message. The number wasn't saved in her contacts, but she must have recognized it because she responded. The text thread would later be recovered by investigators, and it would blow this case wide open in ways no one saw coming. The message read, "I have something of yours. I'm in the parking garage. Level 2. Rebecca responded, "What? Who is this?" The reply came immediately, "You'll want this back. Come down." And here's where everything changes. Because Rebecca Hartwell, cautious, careful Rebecca, made a decision that would alter everything. She grabbed her keys. She didn't change out of her sweatpants and t-shirt. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She just left her apartment, walked down the hallway to the elevator, and pressed the button for the parking garage. The elevator camera shows her at 11:34 p.m. She's checking her phone, her face illuminated by the screen. Her expression isn't scared. It's confused. Maybe a little annoyed. Like she's trying to figure out who would text her something so cryptic, what they could possibly have of hers. The elevator doors open. She steps out into the parking garage. And this is where the footage gets interesting, because the Riverside apartments had 6 cameras in their parking structure. 6 different angles. 6 different perspectives of what was about to unfold. Camera 1, positioned at the elevator entrance, shows Rebecca walking forward, her phone held up like she's using the flashlight. The parking garage is dimly lit. Half the fluorescent lights are out. Management had been meaning to replace them for months. The shadows are long and deep. Camera 2, covering the west side of level 2, catches her about 30 seconds later. She's walking toward a vehicle. It's a dark sedan. The same sedan she'd mentioned to Maya the night before. It's parked in a corner spot, away from the other cars. The license plate is obscured by what looks like mud or deliberately covered. You can see Rebecca slow down as she approaches. Her body language changes. She's more hesitant now. Camera 3, the one that would become the most analyzed footage in Oregon criminal history, shows what happens next. A figure emerges from behind a concrete pillar. But here's the thing that shocked everyone. Rebecca doesn't run. She doesn't scream. She stops walking, and she says something. You can see her mouth moving. The figure approaches her, and they stand there, talking. Just talking. For 3 whole minutes, they have a conversation. Investigators brought in lip readers. They enhanced the footage as much as technology allowed. They could only make out fragments. Rebecca said something like, "I don't understand," and "Why would you?" and then something that might have been, "I trusted you." The figure's back is to the camera, so whatever they're saying remains a mystery. At 11:43 p.m., Rebecca's phone rings. You can see her pull it out of her pocket and look at the screen. She doesn't answer it. The call goes to voicemail. It was Maya, calling to ask if Rebecca had watched the new episode of their favorite show yet. Maya would listen to her own voicemail dozens of times over the next few months, torturing herself with the what-ifs. What if Rebecca had answered? What if that interruption had changed everything? Camera 4 picks up the next part. Rebecca and the figure walk together toward the sedan. Together. She's not being dragged. She's not fighting. She's walking willingly beside this person, and they're still talking. Rebecca opens the passenger door herself and gets in. Camera 5 shows the sedan pulling out of the parking spot at 11:46 p.m. It drives slowly toward the exit ramp. Normal speed. Nothing rushed. Nothing suspicious. Just a car leaving a parking garage late at night. Camera 6, positioned at the exit gate, captures the final footage. The sedan stops at the barrier. An arm reaches out to scan the exit card. The barrier lifts. The car pulls forward. And at exactly 11:47 p.m., Rebecca Hartwell disappears into the night. She was reported missing the next morning when she didn't show up for her shift. Rebecca had never missed a day of work in 4 years. Never been late. When the hospital called her phone, it went straight to voicemail. When they called her emergency contact, her mother Patricia immediately knew something was wrong. Patricia Hartwell was at the police station by noon. She brought photos, recent texts, anything that might help. The police, to their credit, took it seriously. Young woman, reliable work history, completely out of character. They pulled the CCTV footage by 3 p.m. that same day. And that's when the investigation really began, because what the cameras showed made no sense. Rebecca got into that car willingly. She walked with someone she clearly knew. There was no struggle, no force. So what happened? Where did she go? And who was driving that sedan? The police started with the obvious suspects. They always do. Rebecca's ex-boyfriend, Tyler Morrison, was brought in for questioning. They'd dated for 2 years and broken up 6 months ago. It was amicable, everyone said. No drama. Tyler had moved to Seattle for a new job. He had an alibi. He was at a work conference with 200 witnesses. Dead end. They looked at co-workers, patients' family members, anyone who might have had contact with Rebecca. They ran the partial license plate through every database they had. The car was a dark sedan, probably a Honda or Toyota, probably between 2010 and 2015. Do you know how many cars match that description in Portland alone? Thousands. Maya gave them Rebecca's phone records. They found the text message. The number was from a burner phone, purchased with cash at a convenience store in Beaverton 2 days before Rebecca disappeared. The store's cameras showed a person in a hoodie and sunglasses buying the phone. No facial features visible. Paid cash. Untraceable. They interviewed everyone in the Riverside apartments. 143 units. Did anyone see anything? Hear anything? Notice anything unusual? Most people were asleep. A few had been watching TV. One guy on the 3rd floor said he'd heard a car with a loud muffler around midnight, but he heard cars all the time. The building was right off a main road. But then they talked to Denise Palmer in apartment 2B, and things got interesting. Denise was 64, retired, and suffered from insomnia. She spent most nights watching old movies and looking out her window at the parking garage. She liked to people watch, she said. It helped pass the time. Denise told investigators that she'd seen the dark sedan before. Multiple times over the past 3 weeks. Always late at night. Always parked in the same spot. Always with someone sitting in the driver's seat. Just sitting there for hours. She thought it was weird, but she minded her own business. This was Portland. Weird was normal. But here's what made investigators' blood run cold. Denise said the car wasn't there every night. It was there on specific nights. She'd kept a journal, just casual notes about her evenings. She showed them the entries. The sedan had been there on March 1st, March 5th, March 8th, March 12th, and March 14th. 5 times before Rebecca disappeared. The investigators pulled Rebecca's work schedule. March 1st, 5th, 8th, 12th, and 14th. Those were all days Rebecca worked the evening shift. Days she came home late. Days she walked through that parking garage alone around 11 p.m. Someone had been watching her, learning her patterns, waiting. The case made national news by the end of the week. Rebecca's face was everywhere. The grainy CCTV footage played on loop on every news channel. Crime bloggers dissected every frame. Reddit threads exploded with theories. Everyone had an opinion about what happened to Rebecca Hartwell. Her mother Patricia appeared on every news show that would have her. She begged for information. She held press conferences. She created a Facebook page called Find Rebecca that gained 40,000 followers in the first month. She put up flyers on every street corner in Portland. She hired a private investigator when the police leads started drying up. Maya stopped going to work. She couldn't function. She spent 16 hours a day coordinating search parties, managing the Facebook page, following up on tips that came in. Most were dead ends. Some were cruel hoaxes. One person claimed Rebecca had joined a cult. Another said they'd seen her in Las Vegas working as a dancer. People are terrible sometimes. But 3 months into the investigation, something broke. A woman named Jennifer Stokes walked into the Portland Police Bureau with a story that changed everything. Jennifer worked as a nurse at the same hospital as Rebecca. Different department, but they'd chatted in the break room a few times. Friendly acquaintances. Jennifer told the investigators that Rebecca had mentioned something to her about 2 months before she disappeared. They'd been talking about online dating, and Rebecca had laughed and said she'd had the weirdest experience. She'd matched with someone on a dating app, they'd chatted for a few days, and then the person had started asking really specific questions about her schedule. What days she worked. What time she got home. Where she parked. What route she took from the hospital to her apartment. Rebecca had unmatched with the person immediately. She'd told Jennifer it gave her a bad feeling, that it felt like someone was gathering information rather than trying to get to know her. Jennifer hadn't thought much of it at the time. Online dating was full of weirdos. But now, after Rebecca disappeared, it felt significant. The police got a warrant for Rebecca's dating app data. It took weeks to process. The app company wasn't cooperative at first, citing privacy concerns. But eventually, they handed over everything. Rebecca had been on the app for about 4 months. She'd matched with dozens of people. Had conversations with maybe 20. Met up with 3 for coffee. Nothing serious. But there was one match that stood out. A profile under the name, David Clark. 35 years old. Software engineer. Photos showed a reasonably attractive man with dark hair and glasses. Generic. Forgettable. The kind of face that blends into a crowd. Rebecca and David had chatted for 6 days in January. The conversation started normal. Favorite movies. Best restaurants in Portland. Weekend plans. But then David's questions got more specific. He asked what hospital she worked at. What floor. What shift? Rebecca had answered some of the questions before she stopped responding. The messages showed she'd unmatched with him on January 24th. The investigators tried to track down David Clark. The photos on his profile were stock images, the kind you can download from free photo websites. The phone number linked to the account was another burner. The email address was created specifically for the dating app and never used for anything else. David Clark didn't exist. But whoever created that profile was real. And they'd used the information Rebecca had innocently provided to find her. To watch her. To wait for the right moment. The case went cold after that. No new leads. No new evidence. The CCTV footage had been analyzed frame by multiple experts. The FBI got involved. They created a profile of the suspect. Likely male. Organized. Patient. Someone who could blend in. Someone Rebecca might have trusted enough to get in a car with. But they had no name. No face. No real suspects. Just theories and dead ends and a mother who refused to give up hope. 1 year passed. Then 2. Patricia Hartwell aged a decade in that time. You could see it in her face. The weight of not knowing. The torture of hope mixed with despair. Maya eventually went back to work, but she was different. Quieter. More withdrawn. She'd lost her best friend, and she'd lost herself in the process. The Find Rebecca Facebook page stayed active. People still shared it. Still commented. Still hoped. But the updates became less frequent. The searches stopped. The news moved on to other stories. Other missing women. Other mysteries. And then, 3 years and 4 months after Rebecca Hartwell disappeared, a hiker found something in the Columbia River Gorge that would finally provide answers, but not the kind anyone wanted. The hiker's name was Thomas Brennan. He was 62, a retired postal worker who spent his weekends exploring trails. On July 3, 2022, he was hiking an unmarked trail about 40 miles east of Portland when he decided to go off-path to get a better view of a waterfall. He climbed down a rocky embankment, and that's when he saw it. Partially hidden under brush and rocks, there was a car. A dark sedan. It had gone over the edge of the road at some point and tumbled down the steep hillside. The vehicle was heavily damaged, corroded by years of exposure to the elements. Thomas called 911 immediately. The police arrived within an hour. They rappelled down to the vehicle. The license plate was still attached, though barely readable. They ran it through the system. The car had been reported stolen from a used car lot in Gresham on March 10, 2019, 5 days before Rebecca disappeared. And inside the car, they found remains. Human remains. A body that had been there for years, decomposed beyond recognition. But there was clothing. A hospital ID badge in the debris. And dental records would eventually confirm what everyone already feared. They'd found Rebecca Hartwell. The medical examiner's report took weeks. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with the vehicle crash. But there were other injuries. Older injuries. Evidence of a struggle before the car went over the edge. Defensive wounds on her hands. Injuries that told a story of those final moments. The investigation took on new urgency. They processed every inch of that vehicle. They found DNA. 2 sources. Rebecca's DNA was everywhere, which made sense. But there was also male DNA on the steering wheel, the driver's seat, the door handles. They ran it through every database. CODIs. Local criminal databases. Missing persons databases. And they got a hit. But not where anyone expected. The DNA matched a sample from an unsolved assault case in Eugene, Oregon from 2017. A woman had been attacked in a parking garage. She'd fought back. Scratched her attacker. Gotten his DNA under her fingernails. But the attacker had fled, and they'd never identified him. Now they had a link. 2 cases. 2 parking garages. 2 women. Same attacker. They released a DNA phenotyping profile to the public. Likely male. European ancestry. Brown hair. Medium build. Between 30 and 45 years old. But it was still generic. It could be thousands of people. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Genetic genealogy. The same technology that had caught the Golden State Killer. Investigators uploaded the DNA profile to a public genealogy database, and they started building a family tree. It took months of painstaking work, following branches, eliminating possibilities, narrowing down candidates. And finally, they had a name. Marcus Webb. 38 years old. Lived in Portland. Worked as an IT contractor. Moved around a lot for work. And when investigators pulled his social media, their blood ran cold. Marcus Webb had gone to high school with Rebecca Hartwell. They'd graduated the same year. He'd commented on her Instagram posts occasionally. Generic comments. Looking cozy. On her final post. Great pic. On one from February. He was in the background of her life. Someone she'd known in passing but never really thought about. He'd also lived in Eugene in 2017. He'd been in Portland when Rebecca disappeared. And when they pulled his phone records from March 2019, his phone had pinged off cell towers near the Riverside apartments on March 1st, 5th, 8th, 12th, and 14th. The exact same nights the dark sedan had been spotted in the parking garage. The police arrested Marcus Webb on September 18, 2022. He was at his apartment in Beaverton, working from home. He didn't run. Didn't resist. Just asked for a lawyer and stopped talking. His trial began in March 2023. The prosecution laid out their case. The DNA evidence. The phone records. The pattern of stalking. The stolen car. The dating app profile that matched his computer's IP address. The purchase of the burner phone, caught on a different camera angle than the one they'd seen before, showing just enough of his face to make a positive ID. The defense argued it was circumstantial. DNA could be transferred. Phone records proved location, not action. But the evidence was overwhelming. Piece by piece, the prosecution built the story of how Marcus Webb had become obsessed with Rebecca Hartwell. How he'd created a fake profile to gather information. How he'd stolen a car and used it to watch her, night after night, learning her patterns. The most chilling evidence was his computer. Forensic analysts had recovered deleted files. Hundreds of photos of Rebecca. Screenshots from her social media. Photos taken from a distance, in parking lots, at the grocery store, at the hospital. Marcus Webb had been following Rebecca for months. Maybe longer. The prosecution's theory was this. Marcus had lured Rebecca to the parking garage with the text message. Maybe he'd claimed to have found something she'd dropped. Maybe he'd pretended to be someone else. But when she got there and recognized him from high school, she'd been confused but not afraid. He was someone familiar. Someone from her past. They'd talked. Maybe he'd tried to explain his obsession. Maybe he'd confessed his feelings. Maybe he'd become angry when she rejected him. The witnesses who'd analyzed the footage said Rebecca's body language had changed during that conversation. She'd gone from confused to uncomfortable to scared. And then she'd made a decision. Maybe she'd felt trapped. Maybe she'd thought getting in the car was safer than staying in the parking garage. Maybe he'd threatened her. Maybe he'd convinced her they needed to go somewhere to talk privately. The cameras showed her getting in willingly, but willingness and choice aren't always the same thing when fear is involved. Marcus had driven them out of Portland, toward the gorge. What happened in that car would never be fully known. But at some point, Rebecca had fought back. The defensive wounds proved that. She'd struggled. She'd tried to escape. And in that struggle, Marcus had lost control of the vehicle. The car had crashed through a guardrail and plummeted down the hillside. Marcus had survived. He'd climbed out of the wreckage. Left Rebecca there to die. Walked back to the main road. Caught a ride from a passing truck driver who'd later testify that he'd picked up a man claiming his car had broken down, who'd seemed disheveled but calm. Marcus had gone home, cleaned himself up, and waited to see if anyone would connect him to Rebecca's disappearance. For 3 years, he'd lived his normal life. Worked his job. Posted on social media. Went on dates. All while Rebecca's mother searched desperately for answers. All while Maya tortured herself with guilt. All while a community mourned a woman who'd only ever wanted to help people. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Marcus Webb guilty on all counts. First-degree murder. Kidnapping. Stalking. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Patricia Hartwell sat in the courtroom and cried. Not tears of relief, but tears of grief that would never fully heal. She finally had answers, but answers didn't bring her daughter back. Genetic genealogy. The same technology that had caught the Golden State Killer. Investigators uploaded the DNA profile to a public genealogy database, and they started building a family tree. It took months of painstaking work, following branches, eliminating possibilities, narrowing down candidates. And finally, they had a name. Marcus Webb. 38 years old. Lived in Portland. Worked as an IT contractor. Moved around a lot for work. And when investigators pulled his social media, their blood ran cold. Marcus Webb had gone to high school with Rebecca Hartwell. They'd graduated the same year. He'd commented on her Instagram posts occasionally. Generic comments. Looking cozy. On her final post. Great pic. On one from February. He was in the background of her life. Someone she'd known in passing but never really thought about. He'd also lived in Eugene in 2017. He'd been in Portland when Rebecca disappeared. And when they pulled his phone records from March 2019, his phone had pinged off cell towers near the Riverside apartments on March 1st, 5th, 8th, 12th, and 14th. The exact same nights the dark sedan had been spotted in the parking garage. The police arrested Marcus Webb on September 18, 2022. He was at his apartment in Beaverton, working from home. He didn't run. Didn't resist. Just asked for a lawyer and stopped talking. His trial began in March 2023. The prosecution laid out their case. The DNA evidence. The phone records. The pattern of stalking. The stolen car. The dating app profile that matched his computer's IP address. The purchase of the burner phone, caught on a different camera angle than the one they'd seen before, showing just enough of his face to make a positive ID. The defense argued it was circumstantial. DNA could be transferred. Phone records proved location, not action. But the evidence was overwhelming. Piece by piece, the prosecution built the story of how Marcus Webb had become obsessed with Rebecca Hartwell. How he'd created a fake profile to gather information. How he'd stolen a car and used it to watch her, night after night, learning her patterns. The most chilling evidence was his computer. Forensic analysts had recovered deleted files. Hundreds of photos of Rebecca. Screenshots from her social media. Photos taken from a distance, in parking lots, at the grocery store, at the hospital. Marcus Webb had been following Rebecca for months. Maybe longer. The prosecution's theory was this. Marcus had lured Rebecca to the parking garage with the text message. Maybe he'd claimed to have found something she'd dropped. Maybe he'd pretended to be someone else. But when she got there and recognized him from high school, she'd been confused but not afraid. He was someone familiar. Someone from her past. They'd talked. Maybe he'd tried to explain his obsession. Maybe he'd confessed his feelings. Maybe he'd become angry when she rejected him. The witnesses who'd analyzed the footage said Rebecca's body language had changed during that conversation. She'd gone from confused to uncomfortable to scared. And then she'd made a decision. Maybe she'd felt trapped. Maybe she'd thought getting in the car was safer than staying in the parking garage. Maybe he'd threatened her. Maybe he'd convinced her they needed to go somewhere to talk privately. The cameras showed her getting in willingly, but willingness and choice aren't always the same thing when fear is involved. Marcus had driven them out of Portland, toward the gorge. What happened in that car would never be fully known. But at some point, Rebecca had fought back. The defensive wounds proved that. She'd struggled. She'd tried to escape. And in that struggle, Marcus had lost control of the vehicle. The car had crashed through a guardrail and plummeted down the hillside. Marcus had survived. He'd climbed out of the wreckage. Left Rebecca there to die. Walked back to the main road. Caught a ride from a passing truck driver who'd later testify that he'd picked up a man claiming his car had broken down, who'd seemed disheveled but calm. Marcus had gone home. Cleaned himself up. And waited to see if anyone would connect him to Rebecca's disappearance. For 3 years, he'd lived his normal life. Worked his job. Posted on social media. Went on dates. All while Rebecca's mother searched desperately for answers. All while Maya tortured herself with guilt. All while a community mourned a woman who'd only ever wanted to help people. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Marcus Webb guilty on all counts. First-degree murder. Kidnapping. Stalking. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Patricia Hartwell sat in the courtroom and cried. Not tears of relief, but tears of grief that would never fully heal. She finally had answers, but answers didn't bring her daughter back. Answers didn't fill the empty chair at Thanksgiving. Answers didn't give her the grandchildren she'd never have. Answers were something, but they weren't enough. Maya read a victim impact statement at the sentencing hearing. She talked about Rebecca's laugh. Her kindness. Her dedication to her patients. Her love for her friends and family. She talked about the hole Rebecca's absence had left in the world, and how that hole would never be filled. She ended by saying something that stayed with everyone in that courtroom. She said, Rebecca spent her life taking care of others. She deserved to be safe. She deserved to be protected. She deserved to come home that night. And every woman deserves to walk through a parking garage without fear. Every woman deserves to exist in the world without someone watching them, following them, planning to harm them. Rebecca's death shouldn't have happened. And it's on all of us to make sure it doesn't keep happening. The case closed officially in May 2023. But the impact lingered. The Riverside Apartments installed additional cameras and better lighting. Rebecca's Law was proposed in Oregon, requiring dating apps to implement better verification systems and safety features. Emmanuel Hospital created the Rebecca Hartwell Memorial Scholarship for nursing students. And Patricia Hartwell continues to run the Find Rebecca Facebook page, but now it's dedicated to helping other families of missing persons. She's become an advocate for victims' rights. She speaks at conferences. She lobbies for better resources for missing persons investigations. She turns her grief into action because that's the only way she knows how to survive it. The final CCTV footage of Rebecca Hartwell walking through that parking garage has been viewed millions of times. It's been analyzed, dissected, discussed. But what people often forget when they watch it is that this wasn't just footage. This was a real person's final moments of freedom. A real woman who had no idea that getting into that car would end her life. Rebecca was 32 years old when she died. She had dreams, plans. A pottery class she wanted to take with Maya. A trip to Italy she'd been saving for. Kids at the hospital who asked for her by name. A mother who loved her. A best friend who needed her. A whole life ahead of her that was stolen by someone who felt entitled to her attention, her time, her existence. The surveillance cameras captured her last moments of freedom, but they couldn't save her. Technology can document. It can preserve. It can provide evidence. But it can't protect us from the darkness that exists in people like Marcus Webb. That's something we have to do for each other, by believing women when they say they feel unsafe, by taking threats seriously, by creating communities where predators can't hide in plain sight. Rebecca Hartwell's story didn't end with justice. It ended in that ravine 3 years before anyone found her. But her legacy continues in every person who learns from her case, who takes their safety seriously, who looks out for their friends and neighbors, who refuses to let these stories become just another statistic. If this story affected you, if it made you think about the people in your life who deserve to be safe, do me a favor and share this video. Hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, because telling these stories matters. Before you go, I want to ask you something. What do you think could have prevented this tragedy? Better security? Better laws around stalking and harassment? More awareness about the warning signs? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because these conversations are how we create change. Let's talk about it.